Well, let's try and assess the damage being caused from this spat between US and China with regards to trade tariffs going on. Welcoming us and joining us on board, Alastair Newton, co-founder and director at Relevant Business Advisory, joins in the show right now. Alastair, great to speak with you. Is it right to say that it's the recent American economic data only that's lending confidence to Trump to impose these kind of tariffs?
I certainly think that that's a factor. First quarter results and the general performance of the US stock market have, as you know, been better than expected in the case of economic performance. Stock market, well, it's been on a pretty much one-way track for ages, so I don't think there was anything particularly surprising about that. But I don't think it's just about where America is today economically. I also think there is a very strong element at play here of electoral politics. And keep in mind that if there is one issue upon which Democrats and Republicans are largely united, it's in their concern about China. And the fact that sentiment about China and trade is largely bipartisan means that if Donald Trump were to sign up to a deal with China, which was perceived as being a weak deal from the US perspective, the Democrats would be all over him. And we've already seen Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, pushing Trump very hard to take a tough line with China. Indeed, I'd go further than that. It appears that in general terms, if we consider US-China, if we consider US-Iran, if we consider the lines which Trump is taking domestically over the aftermath of the Mueller investigation, attempts by Democrats in the House to subpoena various documentation, including his tax returns and so on, it does look as if the Trump campaign team, which is certainly running at full throttle already, has decided that portraying President Trump as a tough guy, looking after American interests, pushing back against the supposedly socialist Democrats and so on, is the line that they have decided to take in the election campaign, for now at least.
So how detrimental would these tariffs be for the American economy? Do you think it would hurt consumer sentiment hard enough for the White House to consider a partial rollback?
I certainly think it's going to hurt consumer sentiment, and I do think if it drags on, the impact could be significant. We're talking about 25% tariffs here, potentially on all imports from China. The tariffs we've seen to date have been relatively small, 10%, and it has been possible for basically Americans purchasing those items, which doesn't mean the people on the street. It actually means wholesalers or people who are manufacturing things. It has been possible for them to absorb a great deal of that 10% within and basically see their profit margins reduced. That is not going to be possible from here on for two reasons. First of all, 25% is far too high for producers to absorb. And secondly, assuming that we do get today an announcement that Trump is going to extend the tariffs to more Chinese imports, inevitably that is going to hit products which are going straight into the shops in America, and they are going to pass on a significant proportion of that to consumers. Now, the exact proportion isn't clear, but even if we saw only, let's say, 25% of a 25% increase, in other words, something between 5 and 6% hike in consumer prices, that is non-negligible. That is non-negligible, and certainly would outpace the speed of average wage growth in the US, which we've seen over the course of the past year. That is bound to have an impact on sentiment in the US over time. If it's short-lived, Trump will get away with it. If it drags on, I think he's got a big problem.
So, Alastair, do you see collateral damage in form of India, where there could be a, ultimately there could be an impact on imported goods like steel and aluminum?
There's certainly a risk of that. There's no question, although I would say that Europe is more likely to take a hit than India, Europe being, of course, China's biggest export market. But I think there's other things which India needs to worry about right now in American policy, a good deal more than US-China. I think in particular, India needs to be very focused on US policy towards Iran. The likelihood, in my view, that prices are going to go up. Yesterday, we've seen acts of alleged sabotage to tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. That in itself is concerning. And of course, India also stands to be hit by US sanctions if it continues to buy oil from Iran, as I think it almost certainly will, at least in the near term. I would regard that as a bigger concern for India today than the risk of Chinese dumping into the Indian market.
Right. Alastair, just one final word on US-China, because as the trade talks end without a deal, do you see a possibility of another round being held anytime soon?
Oh, there's certainly going to be more talks. Larry Kudlow made it absolutely clear yesterday that there will be a 12th round of talks at some stage in the not too distant future. And there are already reports coming out of Washington that both Robert Lighthizer and Steve Mnuchin are going to be heading to Beijing for further talks shortly. It looks like we now have a target date, provisionally at least, for a Trump-Xi Jinping summit on or around the 23rd of June, when the G20 leaders assemble in Japan for their annual summit. I would guess that the negotiations will continue with an aim to trying to reach a final agreement at that time. And I still think, and clearly I think investors, or the bulk of investors still think, that there is going to be a deal in the foreseeable future.
Right. Alastair, stay with us. We've got to discuss India's political landscape as well. Let me also welcome on board Swaminathan Aiyar, consulting editor at ET Now, in on the discussion to speak about where this election build-up is leading to. Swami, morning. When we spoke with you before polling began, you gave NDA a very clear edge. Now that only the last phase of polling is left over the weekend, does your opinion remain the same, or has anything changed?
I would say the NDA has the best chance of forming the government, yes. I believe it will lose a certain number of seats. On balance, it will lose a very substantial number of seats, especially in the north, some in the west. It will partly make it up in the east and in the south. On balance, I imagine the NDA will fall short of a majority. We will have a hung parliament in all probability. Then the question is, how badly is it hung? I think if the NDA gets 250 seats or more, it will certainly be able to get enough new allies to be able to form the next government. If the NDA tally falls to 230, I think it would be difficult. I think at that time, most likely, we will get a third front government. I do not think we will get a Congress-led government. I do not think the polity is going in that direction. As in the case of Karnataka, as we saw, Rahul Gandhi just unconditional support to a non-BJP government. I think there will be a similar kind of move if the opportunity arises in New Delhi. But in India, a 1% swing in the vote can translate into 50 seats up, 50 seats down. So for all we know, we may get a situation where the NDA is voted back to power on its own. It's also possible that it's beaten so badly that all kinds of new possibilities arise.
So let me bring Alastair into this as well. Alastair, shifting focus to Indian elections now. With the majority of India having already casted their votes, does it appear that the Modi-led government is likely to return to power, as Modi has managed to keep the narrative on nationalism mostly, while the opposition hasn't really been able to encash on the economy faltering either?
Well, I think this is a really difficult question to answer, because obviously we don't get to see any exit polls during this period, and we won't get to see any until 19 May. So I'm a little bit cautious about saying anything very much about what we've seen so far actually means. I think in particular because we do appear to be getting a very high turnout in this general election. And I think most of the experts are scratching their head about what exactly this will mean in practice. We do know that there is a certain amount of pushback against Prime Minister Modi and his government over the economy, especially perhaps in his heartlands in the north of the country. And a large turnout there could mean that we are getting a typical, historically typical at least, element of anti-incumbency coming into play. Now, having said all that, On the other hand, there is nothing I have seen in the Indian elections so far which has led me to believe that the call I've been making for some time, i.e. BJP will be returned to government, albeit with a reduced number of seats and possibly needing to form a coalition to have a majority in the Lok Sabha. I am not changing that view simply because I have not seen anything to date which leads me to believe that I need to change that view. So I'm still saying right now that after this election, Narendra Modi will still be Prime Minister. He won't have as many seats in the Lok Sabha. It may be that pursuing his agenda is complicated by the need for coalition partners to sustain a majority. But I'm still optimistic that my call is correct and that we are going to see BJP continuing to lead the Indian government and not see a repeat of the big shock which we had back in 2004.
So, Swami, you've traveled to the Hindi heartland, which some would believe could be the swing factor. What's your sense? Has the united opposition made things difficult for the NDA? You were talking about different regions. Some brokerages are predicting that the NDA tally could reduce to literally half, from 30-35, from that 74 that we saw in 2014 in UP. Could there be such a sharp fall, and where can this be made up then?
Anti-incumbency, I think, is a fact of life. And the fact of the Mahagathbandhan is a part of arithmetic, which is also a part of political reality. If you go back 5 years ago in 2014, the NDA had roughly 43% of the popular vote. If you take the Mahagathbandhan parties, they also had roughly 43% of the vote. If you now make allowance for a certain amount of anti-incumbency, and anti-incumbency is a thing which covers a very large number of issues, but there is anti-incumbency. Without doubt, you will find that in all the state elections, you are seeing anti-incumbency. Wherever the BJP has been the incumbent, it has lost ground, as we saw in the central Indian elections. And wherever the BJP has been anti-incumbent, as in UP or some other places, it has done well. I would imagine the same pattern to continue, because there is a mood in India which is somewhat sour. It is not that the economy has collapsed, but things have just not gone well enough. There is no vim and vigor, there is no enthusiasm. So that anti-incumbency is going to tell, I think, on this particular UP elections. If that happens, what? If you then go back to arithmetic, on terms of caste, then I'm afraid you find that the Mahagathbandhan has a clear advantage. On the one hand, the upper caste vote may get split between the BJP and Congress. So the Congress staying aside may be eroding part of the BJP advantage. And it's a highly polarized vote. I think people are more likely to vote according to their caste in this particular election. There are people very strongly for and against than in the previous election. And if you go by that, then the castes represented by the Mahagathbandhan parties numerically are more than 50% of the population. So I would say on both these counts, I think the BJP is in for a very severe setback in Uttar Pradesh. Even though Mr. Modi is personally popular, even though lots of people are willing to give him a second chance, I still think on balance there will be a slippage, and a slippage of 3-4% away from the NDA to the Mahagathbandhan, I think could sink the BJP pretty badly.
So, Alastair, some experts believe that BJP-led alliance might fall short on majority and they are unlikely to repeat their performance in the Hindi heartland. What do you have to say to that?
I do. As I said earlier, I think it would be astonishing if they were to repeat the stellar performance of 2014, to be honest. But I want to turn the clock back a couple of years and look at the regional elections, state elections at that time. When BJP failed to secure a majority in a couple of states then, it moved very quickly to arrange coalition agreements which allowed it to take over the governance of those states. I think BJP is certainly very good at post-election coalition building, and in the event that they need to move quickly to form coalition after this general election, I think they will. The other side of that coin is that the Congress party has really shown no willingness whatsoever to build coalitions around this election. And I do rather tend to agree with those commentators who have been saying that actually Congress may not have been really trying hard to win the 2019 election and come back into government straight away, so much as building up a strong base for the next general election. Now, that may sound strange because no party goes into an election actually planning not to win. And were they to win, I'm sure they would be very happy about it. But I think Congress, after its stunning defeat in 2014, still sees itself in rebuilding mode primarily. So I would expect the BJP to be in the strong position to build poaching coalitions to form a majority, should that prove necessary, as many expect, and certainly as would not surprise me either.
Right. Swami, is Priyanka Gandhi really a factor?
Priyanka Gandhi is a big factor for the Congress party internally. She's a big factor for the morale of the Congress party. I mean, those guys were very disheartened. Now there's some more vim and vigor. Everything else, I'm afraid, is against them. It has been the experience that when the Congress party is beaten, if it is beaten badly but it's still number 2, then it bounces back. The moment it becomes number 3, it finds it very difficult to bounce back. In Uttar Pradesh, it is number 4. So frankly, it does not matter. People don't talk about it. When you go in village after village talking to people, people are talking about the Gathbandhan versus the BJP. Nobody mentions this. I asked about Nyay. There is this big promise by Rahul Gandhi that I will give you 6,000 a month, whereas Mr. Modi is only offering 6,000 in a whole year, 12 to 1. And yet nobody is discussing Nyay. It's as they say, there's a saying that a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. In Uttar Pradesh, it's like saying one bird in hand is equal to 12 in the bush, which the Congress is offering. You will find that Priyanka herself, she's a better speaker than Rahul. She's a better speaker than Sonia. But both of those are such lousy speakers that frankly it doesn't amount to very much. In the audiences that we saw, she does not have a natural chemistry with the audience. You see Mamata Banerjee going up and down and like this. The crowd will be roaring back. You see Narendra Modi walking up and down. He has the audience roaring back. I saw Priyanka trying to do that. Very tepid response. So I'm afraid Priyanka Gandhi is not going to make very much of a difference. In fact, we met her. She herself said, no, my focus, she said, is not on this election. My focus is on building up the Congress party. So we immediately said, do you mean by 22 for the next? No, she says, for the next 10 years. So she is definitely not going to be claiming any miracles in this election or even the next state election. She's talking about some long-term change.
Right. Alastair, a clutch of powerful regional parties are trying to unite opposition parties to keep BJP out of power. This seemed a little far-fetched at the beginning of election, but could there be a possibility of any incumbency? I mean, could there be a rude shock we may have in store for us on 23rd?
The possibility certainly exists, but without getting Rahul Gandhi and Congress involved in such a coalition building exercise, I don't think that's going to be very easy, to be honest. I do think that it's hard to rule out anything in politics, including very unlikely coalitions, as we've seen in all sorts of countries in recent years, including, of course, my own country, the United Kingdom, when the Liberals and Conservatives got into bed together. But right now, I would say that I've seen nothing coming from the Congress party which suggests that they're particularly interested in coalition building, and I can't see how you are going to get an effective block on a BJP government BJP-led government forming unless Congress is prepared to get into bed with these powerful regional parties.
Swami, now the Mahagathbandhan has initiated some activities such as the meeting that's scheduled for the 21st of May. KCR meeting started, Chandrababu Naidu making Mamata and Rahul Gandhi smoke the peace pipe. Could there be a possibility of the numbers working out, or are there chances of deflections from the opposition to complete that NDA shortfall?
I said there is a strong likelihood of a hung parliament. And if you remember Mr. Vajpayee, going back to 1996, he had as many as 254 seats and still could not form a government. He didn't need that many more. He just needed, 18, 20. He couldn't even get that because the other sides were against him. So obviously the NDA itself is going to be very active right now, putting out feelers to all the parties. And there are some people who say the NDA will even say, look, we just want the Prime Minister, defense, finance, home, and the rest you guys can get out there and make lots of money. And to that extent, therefore, that the NDA would be strongly positioned, even if it only got 230 or 240, maybe it can get others together. On the other hand, I think the third front people are very clear. They say, don't look at this just as a parliamentary election. We are all facing a rising BJP at the state level. So it is in our interest to do everything possible to prevent the BJP from coming to power at the center, because that has repercussions at the state level. So they are going to make all-out efforts, again, to get together in some way. Rahul Gandhi's strategy, I think, definitely is, as in Karnataka, even if he has more seats, he will just say, I give unconditional support to an anti-BJP front. So, I mean, that is the kind of picture I see emerging. Let us see what happens.
Alastair, the recent Time magazine cover has two facets of Modi. One, the chief divider of India, and second, Modi the reformer. Does this truly reflect how divided India is on him, or even in terms of global perception?
There are certainly concerns internationally, not just in India, about the way in which the BJP has been playing the Hindu nationalism card. And I do think those concerns are going to continue to reverberate in the international press, at least. Notably, for example, The Economist newspaper, very influential and actually, in general terms, extremely thoughtful and well-researched newspaper, has been leading with concerns about Narendra Modi's nationalist leanings. And I think those are going to continue to reverberate, as I said, but I don't think they are going to weigh particularly heavily on investor sentiment. Investors are going to be much more interested in whether Narendra Modi, a second-term Narendra Modi, will be able to deliver on his reform pledges more effectively than he has during his first term. Now, that's not to say that we've not seen reform during a first Modi term, because, of course, we have. And I would also qualify what I'm about to say by noting that in 2014, expectations of reform among the investor community, and I have to say among a lot of India's voters, were totally unrealistic, for which Modi had partly himself to blame, because he did rather talk up what he could expect to do. I do think he is going to have to deliver, should he win a second term, to keep the international investor community happy. He's going to have to deliver more than he did in his first term. And that's where the investment community is going to focus, not on nationalist concerns. And that's not just something which is true of India. It's actually true of a great deal of the democratic world today, where nationalism, of course, has been very much on the rise across the board.
Right. Swami, the new government's job from a market perspective will be quite challenging. Consumption is currently witnessing a massive slowdown, unlike any seen in the past. Credit growth has been sluggish. The financial sector is bracing up for an imminent crisis. What should be the agenda for the new government when it comes to purely economics?
The new government in the first instance has to, there are a series of well-known reforms that need to be done. It is well known that we have problems in land, labor and capital. No government for the last 25 years has seriously tried to do something on the labor market. So everybody says, in China and Vietnam, there are factories of 10,000, 20,000 people. Even in Bangladesh, there are factories of 10,000, 20,000. Here in India, if somebody has 1,000, he's desperately trying to reduce the number of workers to 500. Is there any attempt to change the labor laws? There is nothing serious. Our Land Acquisition Act has made things much more difficult and much more expensive. In China, if the government wants to acquire land, you just go boom, boom, boom. You don't go, you just rush it through. In India, there have been huge delays. It's affected infrastructure. As a part of the project cost, land has now become much, much more expensive than it used to. Finally, real interest rates remain extremely high in the economy. If you see the rate of inflation, consumer price inflation at less than 3%, and a repo rate more than double that. So if you have a country that has high interest rates, high land prices, high labor costs, all these are pulling down the economy. Is the new government going to tackle this? I have a feeling that in the kind of wide coalition that we're going to get, there will be no radical reforms. There will be small incremental attempts here, there, here, there, here, there. So I don't expect any great change. There is a slowdown that you're seeing in India, which is part of a global slowdown. The whole world economy is slowing and India with it. That is not going to get reversed by any radical reforms in India. We will chug along, and it's not bad, because even if we come down to only 6.5% growth in the current financial year, which is well below the 7.5% that is being projected by CPP, even at 6.5%, I think India may end up as being the fastest growing major economy in the world. So yes, we are not going to be doing as well as in the past, but in some relative thing, in a slowing world economy, perhaps we will not do too badly.
All right, Swami, Alastair, both of you, thank you so much for joining us on this discussion today. Great to get your perspective on really where we're headed with these elections. But clearly, it's really going to be up till the last minute, that we find out really how things are going to fare. Just another week, 10 days to go now.